Cool.
Up.
You want it lifted up?
Is that better?
That's great. No, it's not touching it. Is that fine? There you go.
So you're an expert.
I'm an expert, and we had a brilliant steak, courtesy of Sky News.
Okay.
And you are, what channel are you? ARD?
ARD, yeah.
German, mainstream?
It's, yeah, it's the biggest public broadcaster in Germany, so
Okay.
compared with BBC.
Like BBC?
Yeah.
Oh, you're the bad guys then.
So we got a system from you guys
Okay.
after the war.
Oh, okay. And are you, and what's this on? What's this about? What's your...
It's about, I think, the whole right wing in Britain. So I'm sorry. What we are planning to do is just to get an overview about it. So we also went to the UKIP party conference.
Okay.
And we spoke to these guys. And
okay.
of course, also about your trial, about the discussion if you should join UKIP.
Okay. Cool. Fine.
And you are also quite famous already in Germany, so
okay.
I could read also a lot of books about you in Germany.
Okay. I think I bumped into some German journalists, and I think they were from I think they may have been from ARD, and I questioned them. I asked them a few questions.
Okay.
And they couldn't answer.
Okay.
I believe that was when I think they were ARD.
Is that cable okay?
ARD is quite big.
Can I just share?
Can't see it.
He doesn't like it. Look. Fine.
Camera's rolling.
Action.
Okay, then let's start. Maybe the first question. We are just 2 days ahead of the next appointment in the court. So how do you feel at the moment? Or what do you expect?
What do I expect? I expect to wake up in a prison cell on Friday morning. What's actually become apparent, because I've got the transcripts from the previous trial that I was sent to prison for, and the Section 4 order that I got sent to prison for breaking. 3 national newspapers breached the exact same order that weekend. All of this was made aware of Judge Marson, the same judge who sentenced me. None of them have faced prosecution. In fact, one of the newspapers breached 2 reporting restrictions on my trial and on a subsequent grooming trial, and they've faced no prosecution. They've not been arrested. What this is, I know they say justice is blind, but it's not meant to be deaf and dumb. This is clear state targeted persecution. It's evidential by the fact that no other people are committing the same crime and no one's facing prosecution. I feel I'm going to walk into court and stand by my convictions on Thursday morning. And my convictions are that I didn't intentionally breach any laws. I stuck to what I'd been taught and what the website said. For example, when you look at contempt of court guidelines, it states that the court in the courtroom, it must have the details of the reporting restrictions on the screen and on the court door. Now, I have evidence that neither of those, that they didn't follow their own guidelines that day in that court, and I don't really think that. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm in a position for Thursday, but I think I'll be back in prison.
But they are saying you have broken the law.
They're saying I will not have a jury. Give me 12 members of the British public, and I will walk out of court an innocent man. I will be tried by a judge who can sentence me up to 2 years in prison. I'm shocked that a man can get 2 years in prison at the hands of a judge rather than a jury. I thought the whole point in having 12 members of the British public do your decision is for a fair trial. I'm surprised that I'm not allowed a jury. And every law has been broken, even in which the media in Britain have made no deal of. The fact that I was tried, convicted by a judge without having legal representation, without needing to plead guilty or not guilty, no one in this country seems to have made a big deal of it. The media have not made a big deal of the fact that I was imprisoned, and when I was put in prison, I was moved from one of the prisons with the least Muslim population in the UK, and everyone knows what I represent and the problems I have. And I was moved to the biggest Muslim population of any UK prison, for CCAT prison. That's not accidental. That's not accidental. So I'm sorry, I feel like I'm up against the British state, and I actually feel that it's not just me who's up for my verdict on Thursday. I think it's the trust that the British public have in law enforcement, in the court of law, and in free speech.
But why have you done it for a second time? Because you already did it once before, and
yes.
Then you did it again.
So the first time I did it, I learned from the first time. I went on a training course afterwards with Kingsley Nappy, a leading law firm in London, to find out that I wasn't aware that you can't stand on the court property in video. I didn't know that. That's what I was convicted of the first time. My first conviction was for filming in an area I wasn't allowed to film, because I went onto court property. Now, the only reason why I went to that court case was because 5 men, a young girl had got lost. She asked for directions in a Muslim-owned business, and 5 of the Muslim men who worked in that business took the young child upstairs and they gang raped her. Now, after gang raping her, their DNA was all over her. So the police made arrests. They changed the name of their chicken shop and they carried on running the same business. So I went down there and they were running a business whilst on trial for raping a child. Now, when I went down to the chicken shop, I asked the neighbours next door, have any young girls been in that shop? And they said, yes, young school children were in there yesterday. So from my point of view, I've got DNA evidence against who have been raping a child, are allowed to come into contact still. I felt that the British public were in danger, and I felt that the judge had failed in her duty, which should be to protect the British public first and foremost. You had DNA. All those men, for that court case that I first went to, those men are now serving 20 years in prison. They should never have been on bail. The judge gave them bail. I didn't get bail. You've seen that. I got remanded within 10 minutes, but they shouldn't have had bail. Now, I did make mistakes at that first contempt case because I went onto court property. I learned from those mistakes. I made sure when I went to the Leeds trial that I didn't assume guilt, that I didn't go on the court property, that I made sure that the viewers understood that these men were innocent until proven guilty. I didn't confront the men. I just simply asked them a simple question. How are you feeling about your verdict? That's basically what happened, and I was sentenced to prison. I just cannot begin to understand how the sentence fits the crime. I face now, again, up to 2 years in prison on Thursday. I've already spent 2.5 months on solitary confinement. I can't understand how, in Britain, I keep seeing today even, our politicians are talking about political prisoners in other countries. I feel like a political prisoner in this country. I feel like I'm going to be taken away from my wife and children again on Thursday because I refuse to.
I watched some of your videos.
Yes.
You went there. You went to the place in front of the court, and then I think you were not reporting. You were blaming the people without knowing that they are guilty. You were just shouting on them, telling them you are rapists.
Oh, that's their old videos, yeah. Yeah, they're old. That's not. So as I said, I've learned. I went on a training course to understand contempt of court, and I learned to not assume guilt. So yeah, I did everything I could for this most recent trial.
Yeah, but why shouting on people, telling them rapists without knowing that they are guilty? Because
you're on about old videos from a while ago. Yeah, that was my mistake. They have all been found guilty, but at the time, you're right. When I went to Canterbury, I presumed their guilt, which I shouldn't have done. And that's what I've said. I've learned from that by going on a training course to understand that. And I actually made very clear at Leeds that these men are innocent until proven guilty, and that they may walk straight out of court with a not guilty verdict. I didn't assume any guilt, but I felt that we're in a situation in this country where so many children are falling prey to these groups that pre-armed is pre-warned is pre-armed. So I think that we should be doing everything we can to highlight these problems. That's what I was doing. And as I've said, on the judiciary website that I checked that morning, it states that a judge has no power to order a reporting restriction on any information that's in the public domain. I read from a BBC News website. That's what I did. Now, if the judiciary website's wrong, then I'll find out on Thursday. As I've said, I don't think. For 60 years we've had contempt of court laws. Never has a journalist ever been put in prison for publication of material. In fact, their own guidelines advise them that not to send journalists to prison, because then they become like, I don't know, North Korea, China. Nothing I said, actually, this is factual as well, that from the court case, the CPS and Judge Marson, which is the judge that sentenced me, both of them agreed that nothing I said could have prejudiced the trial. Yet now I've had extra charges lobbied at me for Thursday, where stating a fact saying that Muslim men are overrepresented in child grooming cases. They're saying that could prejudice the trial. That is a quote by our Home Secretary, Sajid Javid. It's also a quote from Majid Nawaz, the leader, who's another Pakistani Muslim. It's also a quote from Nasir Amin, who's the head of the CPS, or the ex-head of the CPS. All of them have stood on Sky News, Channel 4 News and BBC News and specifically said that Muslim men are overrepresented and Pakistani men are overrepresented when it comes to child grooming statistics. I just repeated what they said. And if I'm guilty of prejudice in a trial for saying that, I think that Sajid Javid should be in the dock with me.
You already mentioned it, but why do you think it has something to do with Islam?
Well, if I ask you as a journalist, 90%, Muslim men make up 2% of the British population. 2%. They are responsible for 90% of the grooming gang convictions in court. 90% from a population of 2%. Why do you think that is? I'll ask you though. Why do you think? Well, I've just asked a Sky News journalist the same question. Why, if you don't think it's linked to them being followers of Islam, these same crimes are happening in Holland, and it's Moroccans. It's happened in France. It's Algerians. It's happened. The common denominator. If we look at what Boko Haram, when they took 200 women, they took multiple girls in Nigeria. The leader of Boko Haram come out and made a statement saying, Muhammad and Allah command us to do this. We're allowed to do this. ISIS are selling slaves after slave, and the justification they give, not me, the justification they give is that the scripture of Islam permits us to take sexual slaves. So all I'm trying to work out, which we must work out if we want to stop this epidemic, is why Muslim men feel, and it's not just Pakistani men, because we've seen Somalian gangs, Kurdish gangs, Iraqi gangs, no one can deny that these young girls are being taken as slaves. Now, under Islamic law, under Islamic scripture, Muslim men are permitted to take sexual slaves. That's a fact. It says it in the Quran multiple times. Outside of your 4 wives, take whatever your right arm possesses. Sexual slaves. So all I'm trying to do is work out, well, why? And I ask everyone, well, you tell me why. Tell me why 30% of the men convicted for grooming are called Muhammad. Tell me why. I don't know why, but no one can answer it. And as soon as you start, what you should do, when you have a common denominator like that, you should then start researching and looking for why this is happening. And when you do start researching and looking for why it's happening, you then pick up the Quran and you find multiple verses that tell them that they can take non-Muslim women as sexual slaves. And then if you look at the cultural problems of their views towards women, their own women, let alone our women, that women are worth 50% of a man. Our women are cattle. They're worthless. And these men are treating them like that. And in fact, if you go through in Bristol, there was a Somalian gang. One of the men said that it was his religious duty to do this. There was mosque. Some of the men who have committed these crimes have worked in mosques. Some of the men have made comments that the girls are worthless because they're kuffar, non-Muslim girls. Again, you don't need to ask me why they're doing it. They pretty much tell you themselves why they're doing it. And it has to do with religious intolerance. And we have such an issue in this country, as I'm sure you do in Germany, with hate crime, where words are being deemed as hateful. And people are being arrested. 9 people a week are arrested. 9 people a day are arrested in Britain for hate crime. These men who commit these rapes openly use religious and racial reasons for raping these girls, and none of them have ever been charged with a hate crime. If it was religiously or racially motivated, it would carry a far more severe sentence. But they've never been charged with this. And I just think that if a Muslim's watching this, or Muslims are listening to this, if your young girls and your daughters were being taken in their thousands by non-Muslim white English men, and whilst raping them, they were telling them it's because you're Muslim, it's because you're filth, then the whole world would be in uproar. Every politician in this country, Muslims would burn this entire country from one end to the other if this was happening to their daughters. And we're not even allowed to talk about it without being branded and silenced and slandered and attacked and actually in prison now. That's basically now. We're not even allowed to talk about it. And as soon as you identify, for example, what I said about Muslim men being overrepresented, that's a fact. I also am now being charged with saying derogatory things about Islam. The derogatory thing I said about Islam is under Islamic law, under Sharia, a child becomes a woman when she starts her period. That's part of the problem. They're not viewing the... I done an interview on mainstream British TV where I was debating on a show called Nikki Campbell Show. And I said these young children. And the Muslim woman, not only when I watched it back did I understand, the Muslim woman corrected me and said, young women, these are 12-year-old children. But because they've started their puberties, the Islamic community will view them as women. Because they view their own daughters when they start their puberty as becoming a woman. And we don't. We view them as children.
Why are you reporting all these things, and why are you not reporting all the cases which we have seen in the Catholic Church?
Okay, so with regard,
maybe take the people who are watching the child pornography pictures
yep.
on the internet. They are mostly white.
Okay,
British men.
I'll explain that. Yeah, I'll explain it. So basically, with the Catholic Church, I despise the Catholic Church actually in their cover up of paedophilia, and it would be a fact if I said that the majority of religious leaders in Catholic Church, there's a bigger percentage chance that it's going to be a paedophile in the Catholic Church than in a Sikh temple. That's a fact. So I'm not prejudicing any trial. I shouldn't be arrested for it. It's a fact, just like the facts I say. Now, what we've seen with the Islamic community and these grooming gangs is a conspiracy of silence from police, religious leaders, social services. All of them have conspired together to not admit and not help these children. They let it happen, and the reason given in the government report was that they feared being branded racist. Now, the two towns, you've obviously heard of Rotherham, yeah? In Rotherham, 1,400 young girls have been raped. That's a conservative number. It's more than that. That's the ones that were registered with one charity. Now, the Muslim population of Rotherham, if I'm right, is 4%. There's only 10,000. There's only 3,500 Muslim men who fit the criteria age. So we've got 1,400 children from a population of 4%. If you go to Telford, we have 1,000 children from, I think, a population of 7%. Now, if you actually do one of these reports in a town like where I'm from, with a 35% Muslim population, but we've seen no report on Bradford, on Birmingham, on Luton, on the areas, because once they get to a certain percentage, these crimes are not being uncovered. And I think that Rotherham and Telford have been used as scapegoats, because if we saw the true number of rapes, there's upwards of 1 million rapes been committed against young children in this country at the hands of...
Any evidence for that?
Yeah, that's the statistics. If you go through say for example the 1,400 in Rotherham or the 1,000 in Telford, if you go through the interviews from those girls of how many times they were raped, one girl was raped 200 times over a weekend, 200 times. One of the girls had 35 men in the room. Like these are from the children's reports. So what we have is, and that's the reason why I've highlighted it. And the reason why I've highlighted it is because it's something that I've witnessed growing up. I know many young girls who have been victims to these gangs. And the truth and the reality is that these gangs were not tackled simply because they were Muslim. And the government and the authorities and the police would rather see a generation of children raped than be called racist. That's the truth. And that's what's gone on. And that's all now evidential in reports like the J report. And we found that there's been a silence, and not just a silence, but...
Because people... they are facing a trial now. So
these people were facing a trial, yeah.
So
these people are facing a trial, and nothing.
You can't say it's not a topic anymore.
No. Now it's become a topic. But what they don't, what's happened now is with these reporting restrictions, which are on every single Muslim paedophile grooming trial, what they do is they prevent anyone from talking a word about it. And then when the case is finished, they'll lift the reporting restriction, and the public will hear one day's news, rather than hearing the daily accounts. Now, I understand the need to put a reporting restriction on the verdicts of the trials, okay? But not on the details of what's happening to the victims. I think that it's too important, and I think that these laws are being used, these reporting restrictions are being used to stop what 60 million members of the British public understand is happening in this country. And that's truthfully what I feel. And I went with no malicious intent on that day, not to undermine the supremacy of the court or the law. Every bit of information I gave was in the public domain. I didn't assume guilt. I didn't go on the court property, and I was unlawfully and illegally taken off the streets and tried by a judge who made so many errors in that case. I was then held in solitary confinement, and I think that it's a disgrace to Britain. It's 2018.
But one thing I don't understand: who is stopping you from speaking about your opinion? Because we are here, we are talking about it, you are giving interviews. So who is stopping you?
Will you label me as far right?
No, I'm asking you.
Yeah, but I'm asking you. Will you label me as far right?
You.
Yeah, but no, I know you're asking me, but will this report label me as far right?
I'm asking you.
That's a yes then, yeah? That's a yes. So if I ask you, because you are part of the problem as well, same as Sky News, I just told him, that you don't even understand that by labelling people, which you do in Germany as well, all the people who are, there's an uprising happening in East Germany.
I'm asking you, who is stopping you from speaking about your opinions?
No one's stopping me right now from speaking about my opinion, other than the fact that I can't talk about the court cases, because that'll be contempt of court. My point is that the law is being used in a targeted way. If I breached a Section 4 reporting order and 3 other journalists the same weekend breached the exact same order, why is it only me who's facing prison on Thursday? Why is it, when I done it unintentionally, the other 3 were fully aware of reporting restrictions, and I know this, they refused to take their articles down, and none of them have been prosecuted or tried? I'm facing prison for something that the law has to be applied equally across everybody. But I feel that I'm in court on Thursday because I'm Tommy Robinson, not because of what I've done. And unfortunately, they don't want the public educated or aware of some of the things that are happening in this country. So the easiest route to that is to lock up the man who's talking about it.
But no one stops you from talking about Islam.
No one stops. So
no one stops you from talking about Islam.
You get violently attacked for talking about Islam. You come under violent confrontation everywhere you go if you talk about Islam. Trust me. I walk around every day. Just 2 days ago, I had them trying to give it to me in my car when I had my children. I get confronted all the time. 20% of British Muslims believe that violence is a suitable reaction to someone who insults the Prophet Muhammad. These are facts from Trevor Phillips, from a Trevor Phillips poll. Trevor Phillips was the head of diversity in Britain. Okay, the man who brought the term Islamophobia to Britain, Trevor Phillips. 66% of British Muslims would not report on a fellow Muslim who was getting involved in terrorism. 66%. 4%, which is 100,000 British Muslims, believe suicide bombing is justified. We have a huge problem in this country. Why shouldn't we talk about it? Why should it be a far-right issue to be worried? We had 4 successful terrorist attacks last year and 10 prevented. How is it irrational to fear that? And how is it far-right to talk about it? Which is what you play your part. The media you brandish everyone talking about it as far-right. And that is why, under the European Union's broadcasting survey, Britain and the British media, you come about 4th or 5th, I think, the Germans, but you have the least trust. British media have the least trust out of any country in Europe. Not the ex-communist countries or the ex-Eastern Bloc countries. They trust their media. No one in our country trusts them because for too long they've lied. And people see their lies. Like, for example, if you run this report and you call me far right, straight away no one's going to trust what you say because everyone knows I'm not far right. None of my views...
How would you describe yourself?
I'm actually very liberal. Most of my political views are very liberal.
Of course, you are coming from the English Defence League and the British National Party.
Precisely my point. The English Defence League was never categorised as a far-right party when I led it. We have a national extremism unit based in Metropolitan Police Force. They categorised the English Defence League as a centre organisation. We had far-right groups, but the English Defence League was a centrist organisation. The media, people like yourselves, you run the headlines saying far-right, 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 and enough mud sticks. So you then labelled us far right. The English Defence League had a lesbian and gay division. It had a Sikh division, a Jewish division. I'm not actually against immigration. I'm against Islamic immigration. I have a problem with an ideology, that's it, which is Islam. And I have a problem with it because it has a problem with me. It promotes intolerance and violence and separation from people from my background.
Of course, Islam is also a religion.
But
and it's a religion, and
so if Nazism, if Hitler said he was a prophet, and Nazism was a religion, would we show it tolerance? Would we still say, okay, but it's a religion? It's a religion that promotes violence and war against non-Muslims. And it should be called out for what it is. That doesn't mean all Muslims. I'm not saying all Muslims are extreme. What I'm saying is that the problem comes from the ideology of Islam. It comes from the teachings. Muhammad was a barbarian, a warmongering paedophile. And he should be called out for that. And we should not be teaching people in this country that Muhammad was any sort of role model, as he murdered and pillaged. And
so you would compare it, the Nazi ideology and the Islam?
Well, Nazism was responsible for 6 million deaths. Islam's responsible for 270 million. So Hitler was a pussycat compared to Muhammad. Muhammad it hasn't got a touch on him. The Quran has far more anti-Semitism in it than Mein Kampf. The Quran is a far more dangerous book. A far more dangerous book. That's a fact. Again, I know people don't like it, but I sat with the Sky News presenter and everything he pulled me up on, I said, that's factual, that's evidential, that's the truth. It seems that people seem to have a problem with the truth now. And a truth based on factual evidence. If I pick up the Quran, there's 109 verses in that book that incite murder and war against non-Muslims. What should I think? When I see people who quote the Quran and behead people in the streets of our country, what are we supposed to do?
But would you agree that the huge majority of Muslim people
Yes, I would. Yeah. I'd agree that the majority of Muslim people do not follow Islam. If we go round to that bookmakers round the corner, the bookies, and we walk in there, it'll be full of Muslims. They're not following their religion. If we go to a pub on a Saturday night, there'll be some Muslims in there. Just in general, Muslims are committing haram every single day. If you go to a mosque, most of them are actually empty, other than on Friday afternoon. Most Muslims don't follow the Quran. Most Muslims don't follow Islam. Most Muslims are cultural Muslims by name and identity only. But then they still blindly defend something they know very little about. I found that when I meet Muslims and get talking to them, they know very little about their own religion or their prophet. So I'm not saying that every Muslim's a problem. What I'm saying is the teachings of Islam, the intolerance, the violence, is going to bring Europe backwards. It already has. We're seeing our freedoms and our rights eroded due to, and everyone's scared of offending Islam. And they're not scared of what we're going to do. They're scared of the reaction of the Muslim community, which is quite insulting as well. Must be insulting to the Muslims that they can't take criticism without reacting violently or blowing shit up.
But one thing is really interesting that we are only talking about your freedom of speech, but we are not talking about the victims of this grooming gangs anymore. So why is that?
The victim, because
are you really interested in the victims?
Yes, I am. If I wasn't interested in the victims, I wouldn't be prepared to go back to prison on Thursday, and I would have cut a deal to apologise and say sorry. I think, have you met any victims of these grooming gangs? Maybe you should. In fact, I can give you a good charities organisation called the Sikh Awareness Society, who have spent the last 15, 20 years meeting victims. They've actually had to relocate 15 children out. They've had to move them out of Britain to get them away from these gangs. So you need to understand the context and the what's happening to these children. This isn't actually about just paedophilia, because this is about, they destroyed the girls. They torture them. It's more than just raping them and having sex. It's more than that. They're destroying their victims. And I'd say they're destroying them based on the fact that they're not Muslim.
But you are saying the society is silent about it? But why I can read reports about these cases in newspapers?
What the newspapers do is they label them as Asian gangs. Okay, they're not Asian.
They're from Pakistan.
They're not yet. The majority are from Pakistan. Many are Somalian, many are Kurdish, many are Iraqi. Now, when we label them as Asian, Hindus and Sikhs are victims of these gangs. They're being targeted simply because they're Hindu or Sikh. They're not Muslim. Yet they try and blame the whole problem on Asians, rather than identifying specifically, no, this problem's coming out of the Muslim community. We should identify it as that. We should call them out for it. Then the media and the newspapers blame everyone else. Just like exactly Angela Merkel stood on your national TV and she said that multiculturalism has failed. She said that, right? Yeah? That's her quoted. She said multiculturalism has failed. Now, in all honesty, David Cameron said the same at the same time. The truth is that Islam has failed. Okay, the Sikhs, the Jews, the Hindus, the West Indian community, the Polish community now, the Irish community, the Bulgarian community, the Italian community, they've not failed to integrate into this country or assimilate in any sort of way. But again, you broaden the problem and you blame everyone else, which is what the media do. And you blame everyone else because you're scared to identify and name the problem. And the problem is Islam. And I want to have a nationwide discussion on Islam. I think that the general public should be made aware of all of the teachings of Islam, what Islam is, because we have this thing where people just naturally believe Islam's like Christianity or Judaism, that it's a religion of peace.
But since you're mentioning the Hindus, I was living for 5 years in India, and there's a big discussion about raping in India. And raping, which has been committed by Hindus.
Yeah. Well, India is a majority Hindu country, so I would presume the majority of offenders of rape in that country would be Hindu. But I have also seen that certain organisations, the same problems. Look at in your country, Germany, in Cologne on New Year's Eve. Yeah. The news, your newspaper did not report that.
We did?
No, you did after 3 days. After you were forced to report it. Yes, you was. All of your mainstream media hid the fact that 1,000 young men come out and raped and attacked German women. Okay? If you look at the instances of what's just happening now in East Germany, in Cottbus, all across the east of Germany, men that have been invited into your country by Angela Merkel are now attacking, pillaging and raping German citizens. Now, your leader's job and my leader's job of this country is to protect us and keep us safe. Bringing in a million young Muslim men, many of whom actually have gone on to commit terrorism, they were invited into your country by your leader. The media celebrated about how great the diversity of Germany is, and they've gone on to rape and murder many citizens. Now, I care...
How many? Do you know how many?
How many do I know? I know that 228 people would still be alive right now in Europe if we had a similar style ban than what Donald Trump implemented in America. That includes the deaths. That includes the deaths in Berlin. That includes the stabbing. So 228 people's lives would be here now. That's 228 children still with a mum and dad, or fathers still with their sons and daughters, who would not have happened if we wouldn't have welcomed in barbarians. Because that's who's been welcomed in. I'm not saying all of them. I'm up for helping refugees, but we're not going to help refugees by destroying our own countries. And that's currently what we see. You see the uprising already. You see the growth of the AFD party. The result of your elections was like a political revolution. And I sit here quite smiling, not smiling, but knowing that that's the future for Germany. The AFD party are the future for Germany. And that's all across Europe. And the media, the more that you label people, the more you tarnish people, the more that the public are going to become so disillusioned with you and actually hostile towards you because they see you as part of the problem.
So what about you? You mentioned the parties, so there was a discussion if you might join the UKIP party. So what do you think about this idea?
So I first met Jared Batten and I listened to Jared Batten. And he's the first politician I've listened to where I thought, you know what, I'd vote for him. And I've never voted in my life. Like most working class people, I think 30% of this country does not vote. That's us. We don't vote because there's no one to vote for. Because every political leader and every political party are cowards. And they've refused to identify the problem. Jared Batten, when I listened to him, I'd vote for him. So the argument was not... The argument was simple. For me to join UKIP. I'd like to join UKIP. I wouldn't like to lead UKIP. I've never said that. I've never even said I want to become an MP. But I would love to see the political movement. I'd love to politicise the movement that formed when I went to prison under FREETOMMY. That movement was more than about me. That was about a British public who feel betrayed, who feel isolated, who feel oppressed, who feel that they can't speak freely. You know, in East Germany, when I met East Germans when I went to Pegida, they said, we've been here before. You have to whisper. Like communism. When they lived under communism, you can't talk about Islam, you'll lose your job. Yeah, this is Britain. We should be free to talk about what we want. Every member of the public, if you go get any